The morning New York awoke to betrayal was not marked by thunder or chaos, but by a silence so sharp it seemed to pierce the walls of Eleanor Whitfield's Gramercy Park brownstone. Rain slid down the panes of tall windows, drawing crooked rivers across glass that had once framed her happiest memories. Her husband standing proud in his naval uniform, her children racing up the street with scraped knees and laughter, and her roses blooming in perfect order along the fence line. Now, all she saw was distortion, the world bent out of shape by water and time. She had just set her teacup onto its porcelain saucer when the envelope slid through the brass mail slot, cutting the silence with a metallic scrape. At her age, every sound was amplified. The creak of the wooden floor beneath her slippers, the tick of the grandfather clock that had outlived 3 generations, and the hollow echo as the envelope hit the rug. She looked at it for a long time before bending down, her joints stiff, her breath short. The return address made her lips press into a thin line. Whitfield and Barnes, attorneys at law, her eldest son's firm, not Richard himself. His firm, cold, sterile, official. The way you would notify a stranger of eviction. Eleanor's fingers, still steady despite the tremor in her heart, tore the seal. Inside lay a single, elegantly typeset letter. It smelled faintly of printer ink, but to her it reeked of betrayal. Dear Mrs. Whitfield, we regret to inform you that due to changes in circumstances, the Whitfield family estate will be revisited and amended. You are requested to appear for formal proceedings regarding the revision of the will. Witnesses will be present to ensure neutrality and fairness. Her eyes lingered on one phrase, revision of the will. At 82, what else did they expect her to think? A revision meant one thing, that the children she had raised, clothed, and carried through heartbreaks now believed she had outlived her usefulness, that the empire she had preserved for decades was no longer hers to guard. The paper trembled in her hand, not from weakness, but fury. She sat back down in the habak chair by the window, the letter pooling in her lap. Outside, the rain thickened into a curtain, blurring the outlines of cabs and umbrellas. Somewhere, a horn blared, a man shouted, and a dog barked into the gray. The city moved on, oblivious, but inside Eleanor's chest, time folded in on itself. She remembered her late husband, Henry, his laugh echoing down these halls, his hand warm around hers even in the final hospital bed. She remembered Richard, the lawyer now hiding behind paperwork, running through this house with toy cars and pleading for just 5 more minutes of play. She remembered Clara's first art exhibit, her daughter's hands covered in paint, eyes sparkling with dreams, and David, her youngest, once so alive with music, strumming his guitar in the attic until the neighbors complained. My children, she thought, my blood, how could they? Her gaze dropped to the second page, where names were typed in sharp black letters. The witnesses, neighbors, people she had known for decades, the Fitzgeralds from next door, who had once borrowed her sugar and never returned the bowl, Mrs. Klein from across the street, who still waved every morning as she watered her geraniums. Neutral eyes, summoned to watch the quiet humiliation of an old woman while her heirs carved up her life. Her teacup sat untouched. The steam had long vanished. The room, once her sanctuary, now felt like a cage, and for the first time in years, Eleanor whispered aloud, her voice low but laced with iron, "They think I'm finished." But the thing about being underestimated was that it sparked something primal, something her children had long forgotten. Eleanor Whitfield was not finished. Not yet. The following evening, the Whitfield study glowed with lamplight. The same room that had once hosted Eleanor's Sunday salons, poets sipping brandy, politicians shaking hands, young artists nervously presenting their work, was now crowded with papers, pens, and voices that carried no warmth. Her children arrived in a staggered procession, as if to announce themselves with footsteps rather than affection. Richard came first, tall, silvering at the temples. His presence always carried the weight of a verdict. He set his briefcase on the desk with a snap, as though the mahogany wood beneath him were a witness stand. Behind his glasses, his eyes carried none of the boy Eleanor once remembered. Donally, the sharp gleam of strategy. "Mother," he said with a curt nod. No kiss on the cheek, no inquiry about her health. Clara followed, her heels tapping like punctuation across the marble floor. She wore black silk, her hair pulled into a knot so precise it could have been sculpted. She glanced at the shelves of antique volumes, at the gilt-framed portrait of Henry Whitfield, and smirked faintly. Still keeping the mausoleum intact, she murmured, not quite under her breath, Then came David, late as always, fumbling with his jacket, tie askew. His face bore that charming smile he had wielded all his life like a weapon, half apology, half manipulation. But Eleanor saw the faint redness around his eyes, the tremor of a man whose nights were not spent in peace but in debt and despair. Eleanor sat in her armchair by the fire, hands folded neatly, back straight as a soldier. She did not greet them. She waited. Richard wasted no time. He withdrew a folder, flipped it open, and slid several documents across the desk, toward her. "Mother, this is straightforward. We're modernizing the estate, adapting to reality." Her voice, when it came, was quiet but sharp. Reality, or greed, dressed in its Sunday best. Clara stepped forward, perching on the edge of the desk as though it were her throne. "It's not greed, Mother. It's clarity. You've lived generously, preserved beautifully, but times change. Galleries, foundations, property, they require younger hands, sharper eyes, younger hands." Eleanor repeated, her gaze fixed on Clara. "Sharper eyes. When did love grow so blind?" David shifted in the shadows, offering a soft laugh meant to diffuse. "Come on, Ma. Don't make it sound like a coup. It's just business. You'll still have the house, everything you need, but the rest it's easier if we take care of it now. Clean, efficient." Her lips tightened. "Easier for whom?" Richard cleared his throat, tapping the papers. "The will is outdated. It doesn't reflect our current realities. Tomorrow, we finalize the revision. Neutral witnesses will be present. This protects everyone." The mention of witnesses sent a current through Eleanor's chest. She pictured Mrs. Klein from across the street and the Fitzgeralds from next door, familiar faces summoned not to comfort her, but to testify to her undoing. "You've planned this well," she said softly, her voice carrying the faintest tremor of anger. "All angles considered, all loopholes closed, all witnesses chosen." Clara smiled thinly. "We're not here to hurt you, Mother. We're here to secure the future, our future. And what of mine?" The fire crackled, filling the silence that followed. For a moment, the only sound was the restless shuffle of David's shoes on the carpet and the faint tick of the grandfather clock. Eleanor's gaze drifted toward her husband's portrait above the mantel. Henry's painted eyes looked down with the same steadfastness that had carried them through war, recession, and rebuilding. She inhaled, steadying herself with the memory of his voice. "Never let them decide your worth." When she looked back at her children, her expression had hardened into something unshakable. "You've mistaken my age for weakness. My silence is for surrender. My love for permission." Richard frowned, leaning forward. "Mother, no," she cut him off. Her voice filled the room, firm and resonant. "You may bring your papers, you may summon your witnesses, but remember, these witnesses see more than signatures. They see truth, and truth does not bend to ink and ambition." Clara's smirk faltered. David's eyes darted away. Richard pressed his lips together, masking the unease that flickered briefly across his face. The clock struck 9. Its chime rang like a gavel, final and solemn. Eleanor rose from her chair, frail in frame but towering in presence. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a vow, "you will see that I am not finished." She left them in silence, their papers untouched, their certainty cracked. The morning broke crisp and clear. The rain had swept away overnight, leaving New York glistening as if the city itself had been polished for a performance. Eleanor rose early, long before the clock chimed 6, and moved through her brownstone with a purpose that surprised even her. Her joints ached, her breath caught now and then, but her mind was sharper than it had been in years. Today, the stage would be set. She dressed with care, choosing not the soft woolen cardigan her children expected, but a steel gray suit Henry had once insisted she keep for occasions of battle. She pinned her silver hair into a tight bun and clasped around her neck the pearl necklace she de-inherited from her grandmother, a woman who had crossed the Atlantic with nothing but a trunk and her pride. By 7, she stood in the study. The documents Richard had left sat neatly stacked, untouched. The fire was lit, the curtains drawn open to let sunlight spill across the mahogany desk. Eleanor wanted no shadows today. At 8:30, the doorbell rang. The first to arrive were the witnesses. Mrs. Klein from across the street, still sprightly at 75, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Behind her, the Fitzgeralds, a couple who had raised their children alongside the Whitfields, their friendship always tinged with envy at the brownstone's grandeur. And finally, young Daniel Ortiz, a local notary and family acquaintance, his presence ensuring legality. They entered politely, offering nods and murmured greetings. But Eleanor could feel it, the curiosity in their eyes, the quiet thrill of being invited into someone else's storm. She smiled graciously, gesturing to the chairs arranged in a half-circle facing the desk. Please, make yourselves comfortable. Today will be enlightening. The witnesses exchanged glances, sensing layers beneath her words. Moments later, her children arrived. Richard strode in like a judge entering chambers, his leather briefcase gleaming. Clara followed, perfume trailing, her heels stabbing into the rug. David shuffled last, stifling a yawn, his eyes shadowed from whatever tavern or trouble had claimed his night. Mother, Richard said briskly, shall we begin? Eleanor inclined her head. By all means. He laid out the revised documents, speaking with the precision of a man accustomed to courtrooms. The estate, as previously outlined, is being redistributed. Mother retains occupancy of the brownstone for the duration of her lifetime. Upon her passing, it transfers to the siblings jointly. The Hudson Valley property, the art collections, and all financial endowments are to be divided equally among the three of us. Effective immediately, Clara added smoothly. This ensures the assets remain functional and profitable, rather than stagnant. We've also agreed on measures to protect the family legacy from mismanagement. Eleanor raised a brow. Mismanagement. Her daughter's smile was a thin blade. You've given generously, Mother, sometimes too generously. We want to ensure what remains is preserved. David gave a lazy shrug, his smirk betraying his relief. He had no need for art collections or property, only the cash they represented. The witnesses scribbled notes, eyes darting between mother and children. Eleanor allowed the silence to stretch before speaking. Her voice, though calm, carried like a bell. You speak as though I am already gone. Richard cleared his throat. This is not about that. It's about efficiency, fairness. Fairness, she cut in, her gaze piercing. Tell me, Richard, when your father worked 14-hour days to establish this family's footing, was fairness the word he used, or sacrifice? He hesitated, lips pressed thin. Clara leaned forward, her tone sharpening. Mother, no one is erasing father, but times change. Legacies adapt. You taught us that yourself. Eleanor's eyes glinted. And yet you forget the lesson that mattered most. Loyalty. The witnesses shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Klein's pen paused mid-scratch. Richard recovered, gesturing toward the papers. With all due respect, Mother, this isn't a debate. The revisions will proceed. The witnesses are here for formality. For formality, Eleanor repeated, her voice low. Or for exposure. The words hung in the air, heavy as stone. She rose slowly from her chair. The firelight caught her pearls, her steel gray suit, and the set of her jaw. You believe these witnesses will watch me bend, but I tell you now they will watch you break. Gasps echoed softly among the onlookers. Richard stiffened, Clara flushed, and David chuckled nervously. Eleanor turned toward the witnesses. You were brought here to see a signature. Instead, you will see truth. You will see how ambition corrodes blood, how greed gnaws at legacy. And when you leave this house, you will remember which Whitfields still stood with honor. The room crackled with tension. Richard's fist clenched atop the desk. Clara's eyes narrowed to slits. David looked as if he might bolt. Eleanor lowered herself back into her chair, folding her hands with deliberate calm. Now then, she said, her voice steady as a drumbeat. Shall we proceed? The witnesses said nothing, but in their silence, Eleanor sensed the tide shifting. The study thickened with silence, the kind that presses against the ribs and makes breathing feel like betrayal. For a long moment, no one moved. Only the faint hiss of the fire and the steady tick of the grandfather clock filled the air. Richard adjusted his glasses, his lawyer's mask sliding back into place. Mother, this display may be dramatic, but it doesn't change the facts. The documents are prepared, and the witnesses are present. All we require is your signature. You can make this easy or unnecessarily difficult. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her eyes steady on him. Do you think difficulty frightens me, Richard? I have buried a husband, endured wars, and raised 3 children through storms you can scarcely imagine. What is one more battle? Clara shifted forward, her tone tight with irritation. Mother, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're trying to protect the family name. Do you want people to whisper that the great Whitfield matriarch clung desperately to possessions she could no longer manage? Eleanor's lips curved faintly. Better they whisper that than the truth, that her children betrayed her while she still breathed. The words struck like arrows. Clara's composure faltered. Even Richard's jaw tightened. David, lounging with his usual pretense of detachment, let out a strained chuckle. She's good. Good. If you weren't my mother, I'd say you missed your calling as a lawyer. The witnesses watched intently now. Mrs. Klein's eyes flicked between them, sharp as a hawk's. Mr. Fitzgerald coughed into his fist, uncomfortable, while Daniel Ortiz scribbled more furiously than before. Richard straightened, voice clipped. Enough. Let's move forward. He opened the folder and tapped the first page. Mother, this is the deed to the Hudson Valley property. Sign here, transferring co-ownership effective immediately. He slid the pen across the desk. Its silver body gleamed under the lamplight, waiting. Eleanor did not reach for it. Instead, she rose, slowly but with deliberate grace, and crossed to the bookshelf behind her. The witnesses turned their heads, following her every step. From the highest shelf, she drew down a leather-bound journal, its spine cracked with age. She set it on the desk with a quiet thud. Richard frowned. What's this? Your father's words, Eleanor replied. She opened the journal, flipping through pages inked in Henry Whitfield's steady hand. She stopped at a passage and read aloud, her voice resonant. The estate belongs not to stone or paper, but to the blood and honor of this family. May it never be bartered for convenience, nor stripped by greed. Let it serve as a beacon of loyalty, for without loyalty, legacy is ash. The room fell still. Even the fire seemed to pause its crackle. Eleanor closed the book with a snap. Your father built this with integrity. If you dare dismantle it in front of these witnesses, then let them carry his words with them too. Let them testify not only to your signatures, but to your betrayal. The witnesses exchanged looks. Mrs. Klein's brows arched, and Mr. Fitzgerald shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Daniel Ortiz, though young, appeared visibly unsettled. Clara's voice sharpened. This is manipulation. No, Eleanor said softly. This is memory. And memory carries more weight than ink. Richard's patience thinned. He pushed the journal aside with the edge of his folder. Sentiment does not override law. Sign the documents, Mother. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes locking on his. And if I refuse? Richard exhaled through his nose, steady but tense. Then we proceed with litigation. You'll lose not only control, but dignity. The witnesses will report your obstinacy, and the courts will strip away the rest. Do you wish to endure that humiliation? For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her heart. Litigation, courts, endless proceedings. Could she withstand it? Her health was not what it once was, her energy finite. But then she looked at the faces around her. Mrs. Klein, pen poised. The Fitzgeralds wary. Daniel uncertain. Witnesses, yes, but also mirrors. What they saw today would echo beyond these walls. And Eleanor Whitfield was not about to be remembered as a frail relic yielding to greed. She inhaled deeply. You speak of law, Richard. But the law demands truth, and truth demands witnesses. Tell me, are you certain these neighbors will testify in your favor after what they've seen today? Richard's eyes flicked, just briefly, toward Mrs. Klein. That fraction of hesitation was all Eleanor needed. She smiled faintly. I thought not. The tension snapped like a taut wire. Clara rose, pacing toward the window, her reflection jagged in the glass. David rubbed his temples, muttering, "This is a circus." But the witnesses remained silent, their pens scratching, their eyes heavy with judgment. Eleanor sat back, folding her hands once more. You wanted witnesses. Now you have them. But remember, witnesses cannot unsee. The clock chimed again, its sound tolling like a warning. The battle had only begun. The weight of the clock's chime lingered long after its final note, as though time itself were holding its breath. In the study, the firelight cast shadows that seemed to grow taller with every flicker, swallowing the edges of the room. Richard adjusted his papers with unnecessary force, the shuffle sharp enough to echo. We're not here for theatrics, he snapped, his composure cracking. This is a legal proceeding, Mother Sin. But Eleanor did not move. She sat tall, her pearls glinting, her gaze fixed on her eldest son with a steadiness that made even Richard falter. You speak of law, she said, her voice calm. But what of morality? What of loyalty? Clara spun back from the window, arms folded tight across her chest. Morality doesn't pay property taxes. Loyalty doesn't keep the galleries solvent. You've been too generous, Mother, donating to hospitals, endowing scholarships. and maintaining that crumbling Hudson Valley estate. It's bleeding resources. Resources, Eleanor repeated softly. Do you hear yourself, Clara? You reduce our family's legacy to resources. Tell me, does a painting hang on a wall as a resource? Did your father sweat through nights of debt to be counted as a resource? Clara flinched. Just for a moment, her icy veneer cracked, revealing the insecure daughter who had once begged her mother to attend every gallery opening. David, slouched in his chair, finally broke his silence. His voice carried the weariness of a man cornered by his own choices. Look, let's not pretend this is about honor. It's about survival. I've got debts, Richard's got his empire to maintain, and Clara's got her galleries. We can't wait for you two. He caught himself before finishing the sentence, but the word hung in the air like smoke. Die. The witnesses stirred. Mrs. Klein's eyes narrowed. Mr. Fitzgerald whispered something to his wife. Daniel Ortiz's pen froze mid-scratch, his jaw tightening. Eleanor's heart clenched, but she did not let her children see the wound. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice steel. So there it is. You no longer hide it. This is not about efficiency. It is not about legacy. It is about greed and desperation. Richard slammed his palm onto the desk. The sharp crack jolted the witnesses. Enough. You think words and sentiment will stop this? The papers are binding, witnesses or not. Once you sign, it's done. And if you don't, the courts will take their course. Eleanor let the silence settle. Then, with deliberate slowness, reached for the leather-bound journal once more. She opened it not to Henry's words, but to a folded letter tucked between its pages. Carefully, she drew it out and set it upon the desk. Richard's eyes narrowed. What's this? Evidence, Eleanor replied. She gestured to the witnesses, read. Mrs. Klein, nearest, reached hesitantly for the letter. She adjusted her glasses and began to read aloud. Dearest Eleanor, should I go before you? Know this. I entrust you with final say. Our children are brilliant, but brilliance can sour into ambition. Protect what we built. Do not yield unless your heart believes it, right? I have instructed the trustees accordingly. If ever they move against you, remember you hold the final word. It was Henry's handwriting, his unmistakable scrawl, written years before his passing. Gasps rippled through the room. Clara paled, Richard froze, and David muttered a curse under his breath. Eleanor's voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. Your father anticipated this day. He knew ambition could turn to greed, and he gave me power, not you. Richard snatched the letter, scanning it with shaking hands. This doesn't override legal documentation. It's sentimental, informal. It is binding, Eleanor interrupted. It was notarized, asked Daniel. All eyes turned to Daniel Ortiz, who shifted uneasily. It's true, he admitted, his voice low but clear. I've seen copies of this document in the trustee archives. Mr. Whitfield ensured it was preserved. The room detonated in chaos. Clara's voice rose sharp, accusing Daniel of bias. David stood, pacing, tugging at his collar. Richard barked about contesting legality, his lawyer's armor cracking under the weight of truth. But the witnesses, they had heard enough. Their pens scratched furiously, capturing not just signatures but the venom, the fractures, and the unveiled greed of Eleanor's heirs. Eleanor stood, slow but unshaken. Her presence filled the room. You wanted witnesses, she said, her voice ringing with quiet triumph. Now they have witnessed everything. Not just documents, not just signatures. They have witnessed who you are. Clara's voice broke, trembling with anger. You can't do this. Eleanor looked at her daughter, really looked, past the silken ambition. To the girl who once painted her first canvas in the backyard. Her heart ached, but her spine did not bend. I already have. The fire roared higher, its flames crackling like applause. The balance had shifted. For the first time, Richard, Clara, and David realized this would not be the easy victory they had imagined. The study no longer felt like a courtroom but a battlefield. Shadows from the fire danced across portraits of long-dead Whitfields, as though generations past had gathered to bear witness to the reckoning. Richard sat rigid, clutching his father's letter in white-knuckled fists. His carefully constructed authority crumbled. And beneath it lay the son who had once trailed behind Henry with desperate admiration, always seeking approval, never quite earning it. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before, tinged, not with command but with fear. If this stands, Everything we planned is gone. Clara pressed her palms against the window ledge, her reflection fractured by glass. Her breathing came fast and shallow. Years, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Years, building the galleries, courting donors, expanding networks. I can't start over. David slumped into his chair, running a hand through his disheveled hair. The mask of charm was gone, leaving only exhaustion. I just needed a way out, he muttered. I didn't mean. His words trailed into silence. The witnesses said nothing, but their pens moved relentlessly. Every twitch, every confession, every unraveling was captured. Eleanor stood at the center of it all, her steel gray suit catching the glow of the fire, her pearls luminous against her throat. She felt Henry's presence as if he stood beside her, his voice steady in her mind. You are stronger than they remember. Her voice filled the room. You believed wealth was measured in property and profit. You forgot the true wealth of this family, our name, our honor, and our loyalty. You wanted witnesses to confirm my weaknesses. Instead, they will leave here with the truth, that I stood, and you faltered. Mrs. Klein lowered her pen, eyes glistening with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. Eleanor, she said softly, you don't need us to tell the world. You've already done it yourself. The Fitzgeralds nodded, their faces heavy with the weight of what they had observed. Daniel Ortiz cleared his throat. This will go on record. The trustees will honor Mr. Whitfield's directive. Legally, your position is protected. Richard's shoulders sagged. For the first time in years, his certainty was gone. Clara turned away, wiping a tear. She refused to let anyone see. David stared at the carpet as though it might open and swallow him whole. Eleanor looked at each of them, her heart torn between triumph and grief. I did not want this fight, she said. I wanted family. But if I must choose between protecting Henry's legacy and surrendering it to ambition, then I will fight until my last breath. Silence followed, broken only by the fire's hiss. At last, Richard gathered the scattered documents, his movements stiff. This isn't over, he muttered, but the words carried no conviction. He closed his briefcase with a dull snap and strode from the room. Clara followed, heels clicking like broken metronomes, her shoulders trembling. David lingered, eyes darting to his mother, a flicker of regret flashing before he too slipped out. The witnesses rose slowly. They shook Eleanor's hand with quiet respect before departing into the night. One by one, the doors closed behind them, leaving the study still and solemn. Eleanor sank into her armchair, exhaustion settling into her bones. The fire warmed her face, and for the first time in days, her chest loosened. She had not won everything. Her children's love remained fractured, their ambitions unquenched, but she had preserved what mattered most: dignity, legacy, and truth. Her eyes drifted to Henry's portrait. We did it, she whispered. They thought I was finished. But I remembered. The grandfather clock struck midnight. Its chimes echoed through the empty halls, steady, unyielding. Eleanor closed her eyes, not in defeat, but in peace. For though battles may end in ashes, the truth once witnessed cannot be undone. And in that silence, she knew, her story was no longer just hers. It would be remembered,